My life, on the surface, was idyllic. A successful career in tech, a beautiful home in a well-manicured neighborhood, and, the cherry on top, a Tesla charging station, personally sponsored by Elon Musk himself. A perk that made me the subtle envy of more than a few neighbors, especially Karen. It was a symbol, not just of my eco-consciousness, but of a certain level of achievement. The kind that whispered, "I've made it." The kind Karen clearly itched at. I had even caught her taking photographs, which I later understood. The white picket fence, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the gleaming Tesla station. It was all picture perfect. Until, of course, it wasn't. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an outrageously high electricity bill. Not just a slight increase, the kind you chalk up to a few extra loads of laundry, or a particularly hot month. No, this was double. My usual amount, doubled. My stomach immediately clenched. I'm meticulous, almost obsessively so, about energy consumption. I track everything. So, a bill this high was a glaring red flag, a flashing neon sign screaming, "Something is wrong." My initial reaction was a whirlwind of self-doubt. Had I been careless? Had I left the air conditioning running while I was away on that weekend trip? Was my water heater, despite being relatively new, suddenly malfunctioning and guzzling power like a thirsty marathon runner? I launched into a full-scale home energy audit. I went room by room, flipping switches, checking appliances, even unplugging things I rarely used, like the television in the guest bedroom. I felt like a detective in my own home, searching for the culprit, the energy vampire that was draining my resources. But every check came up empty. The air conditioner was fine, the water heater purred along efficiently, and even my smart thermostat confirmed my energy-saving settings were intact. The numbers on the bill simply didn't add up, and a gnawing sense of unease began to settle in. It wasn't me. So, what or who was it? The seed of a very disturbing suspicion was planted. The unease festered for days, turning into a low-level hum of anxiety that followed me everywhere. I found myself staring out the window more often, scanning the street with a newfound vigilance. It was late one Tuesday night around 2 a.m. when I finally saw it. I'd been unable to sleep, the ridiculous electricity bill replaying in my mind like a broken record. I got up to get a glass of water, and as I passed the living room window, a flicker of movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a neighborhood cat. We had a few strays that liked to prowl around at night, but then the shape solidified and my breath hitched. It was a car, a sleek, unmistakable silhouette, a Tesla Model X, Karen's Tesla Model X, and it was pulling into my driveway. My heart started pounding. What was she doing? I crept closer to the window, peering through the blinds. Karen, the self-appointed HOA queen, the woman who'd once fined me for having my recycling bin out 2 hours past the designated collection time, was now creeping up to my house in the dead of night. She wasn't carrying her usual clipboard, thankfully, but she was carrying something else, something long and thick. A charging cable. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "No way." My eyes followed her as she approached my outdoor outlet. The standard one, mind you, not the gleaming Tesla charger Elon himself had blessed me with. With a practiced motion that spoke volumes about how often she'd done this, she plugged the cable in. I froze, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. This was a theft, blatant, audacious theft. "Are you seeing this?" I said in my mind. But to who? This is actually happening. Karen, meanwhile, leaned against her Tesla, casually scrolling through her phone as if she were at a public charging station, as if she hadn't just invaded my property and started siphoning off my electricity. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was almost as infuriating as the act itself. Suddenly, the questions, so long unanswered, are now. A memory surfaced of her asking about my charger weeks ago. "Oh, that's fancy," she had cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Elon Musk, you say? Must be nice. Do you even use it much?" I'd brushed it off then, but now, the question echoed in my mind with a sinister new meaning. It wasn't curiosity, it was reconnaissance. The seed of suspicion had fully bloomed, bearing bitter, shocking fruit. It was time to gather the evidence, to water that bitter harvest, and serve Karen a dish of cold, hard proof. The image of Karen, bathed in the faint glow of my outdoor light, nonchalantly stealing my electricity, was burned into my mind. Sleep was impossible. Instead, I retreated to my office, the hum of the security system a stark contrast to the silent fury building within me. As I started to review the security footage from the past few weeks, a wave of memories washed over me, reframing my relationship with Karen in a harsh, new light. It wasn't just about the electricity, was it? This went deeper. This was Karen, after all. Our history wasn't exactly filled with friendly neighborly chats and borrowed cups of sugar. It was a history of petty grievances, passive-aggressive notes, and a constant simmering tension. The root of it all, I realized with a jolt, was envy. It started subtly. Back when I first moved in, she'd made a point of commenting on my new money status, her smile tight and insincere. Then came the thinly veiled digs at my career. "Oh, you work in tech," she'd say, the word dripping with a condescension that was both baffling and infuriating. "Must be nice to have all that disposable income." The comments escalated after the Tesla charger installation. The Elon Musk sponsorship, a genuine point of pride for me, seemed to particularly irk her. I remembered one particularly galling incident. I'd hosted a small, quiet gathering. A few friends, some mellow music, nothing outrageous. The next morning, Karen was at my door, clipboard in hand, a smug expression plastered on her face. "Your guests' cars were parked slightly over the designated line," she'd announced, her voice dripping with self-importance. "That's a violation of HOA Rule 3.2b, subsection C, $50 fine." I'd paid the ridiculous fine, of course, but the resentment had lingered. Another time, it was the color of my porch light. Apparently, warm white was not an approved hue. Another fine. Another passive-aggressive note. Another instance of Karen wielding her HOA power like a weapon. Each incident, seemingly minor on its own, had built up, creating a wall of resentment between us. Seeing the security footage now, seeing her blatant theft, it all clicked into place. This wasn't just about saving a few dollars on her electricity bill. This was about power. It was about Karen, in her twisted way, trying to level the playing field, to take something from me, to diminish my success. It was about control, and knowing that made the whole thing even more infuriating. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, long-running campaign of petty revenge. And I was done being her victim. I was ready to fight back. I was going to go to war. My mind began formulating plans. Fueled by a potent cocktail of anger and a thirst for justice, I launched my own counteroffensive. Karen might have thought she was being clever, sneaking around in the dark, but she'd underestimated me. My home wasn't just a house, it was a smart home, and I was about to use every technological advantage at my disposal. This wasn't just about getting my money back, it was about exposing her hypocrisy and reclaiming my peace of mind. The first step was upgrading my security system. The existing cameras were good, but I needed something more, definitive. I installed a new, state-of-the-art system with multiple high-resolution cameras, strategically positioned to capture every angle of my driveway and, crucially, that outdoor outlet. These cameras weren't just recording. They were time-stamping every single event, logging every watt of power drawn from that specific outlet. I wanted irrefutable proof, the kind that even Karen, with all her HOA maneuvering, couldn't wiggle out of. My nights became a vigil. I meticulously reviewed the footage, each clip a further nail in Karen's metaphorical coffin. There she was, night after night, the same routine. The Tesla pulling in, the furtive glances, the plugging in, the smug scrolling on her phone. It wasn't just a few minutes here and there. She was staying for hours, draining my electricity while I slept. The gall of it was astounding. I also started digging into my past electricity bills, comparing them to the usage logs from the new system. The correlation was undeniable. The spikes in my bills perfectly matched Karen's nocturnal visits. I even cross-referenced the dates with her social media posts, pictures of her Tesla parked at various locations during the day, confirming that she was indeed driving it and needing to charge it. Every piece of data I gathered solidified my case, painting a clear picture of a deliberate, long-term pattern of theft. This was no longer a suspicion. It was a meticulously documented crime. And I was building an airtight case. I was ready. With my evidence meticulously compiled, time-stamped videos, electricity usage logs, even cross-referenced social media posts, I felt ready. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. It was going to be a precise, calculated takedown. I chose a Saturday morning, knowing Karen would likely be home. I walked over, my phone clutched in my hand, not with trepidation, but with a sense of cold, hard purpose. I didn't bother knocking. I rang the doorbell twice, a sharp, insistent sound that echoed through her, likely, immaculately decorated house. The door swung open, revealing Karen in her usual uniform, a floral cardigan despite the warm weather, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, good morning," she chirped, the picture of suburban innocence. "We need to talk, Karen," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. Her smile faltered, but only slightly. "Oh?" I held up my phone, the screen displaying a crystal-clear image of her, caught red-handed, plugging her Tesla into my outlet. "I think you know what this is about." For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. Then, to my utter astonishment, she laughed. A light, airy laugh that grated on my nerves. "Wow," she said, crossing her arms. "You really went all out, didn't you?" "All this for a little electricity?" My jaw tightened. "A little electricity? You've been stealing from me for weeks, Karen, night after night." She shrugged, a gesture of such blatant disregard that it took all my self-control not to explode. "Honestly, I don't know why you're getting so worked up. It's not like I'm robbing a bank, it's just a bit of power. You barely even use that outlet." The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated audacity. I could barely process what I was hearing. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't apologizing. She was acting as if I was the unreasonable one. "That's not the point, Karen," I said, forcing myself to remain calm. "It's the principle. You can't just take things that don't belong to you. You need to stop. Immediately." She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Look," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I was going to ask you eventually. I just figured you wouldn't mind. You have that fancy Tesla charger after all. Elon Musk himself. It's not like you need that little outlet." That was the final straw. The mention of the Tesla charger, the smug reminder of my good fortune, twisted into a weapon of entitlement, was too much. "That's not how this works, Karen." The words finally came rushing out. She rolled her eyes. "Fine, I will stop." I almost believed it, but then I saw the corner of her lips curve. "You are unbelievable." I knew now this would be war. I left, starting my plans. Karen's infuriating nonchalance, her utter lack of remorse, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about getting her to stop. It was about exposing her, about making her understand that actions have consequences. But as I walked back to my house, a nagging feeling persisted. Something about her smugness, her almost too casual attitude, didn't sit right. It felt rehearsed, like she wasn't afraid of being caught because she had a safety net. That's when I started to consider the possibility of a larger picture. Could Karen really be acting alone? The HOA, with its labyrinthine rules and regulations, was a breeding ground for petty power plays. And Karen, with her years of experience and her network of friends on the board, was perfectly positioned to manipulate the system. I decided to expand my investigation. I started subtly questioning my other neighbors, casually mentioning my high electricity bills and asking if they'd noticed anything unusual. At first, most were hesitant, reluctant to rock the boat. The HOA, under Karen's reign, had instilled a culture of fear and silence. But then Mr. Peterson, an elderly gentleman who lived across the street, spoke up. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I've been having the same problem. My bills have been sky-high for months. I thought it was my old water heater, but—" He trailed off, his eyes narrowing. I saw her, Karen. One night she was parked in my driveway, plugged into my outdoor outlet. That was the confirmation I needed. It wasn't just me. Karen was a serial electricity thief, preying on multiple neighbors. And the more I talked to people, the more I realized the extent of her network. Another neighbor, Mrs. Davis, confessed that she'd seen Karen using her outlet once, but Karen had played it off as a mistake, claiming she'd gotten the houses confused. The pieces started to fall into place. Karen's influence within the HOA, her seemingly untouchable status, the reluctance of my neighbors to speak out, it all pointed to a system of complicity. There was at least one other person involved, at the very least, turning blind eye. Someone on the HOA board, someone with the power to protect her, to bury complaints, to make sure Karen remained untouchable. This wasn't just a case of petty theft anymore. It was a conspiracy, a quiet corruption that had been festering within our seemingly perfect community. And I was determined to expose it, root and stem. The question was, how deep did this rabbit hole go? And who else was down there with Karen? I needed names and a new plan. Knowing that confronting Karen directly had been a fruitless endeavor, and suspecting a deeper conspiracy within the HOA, I realized I needed a new approach. A direct accusation wouldn't work. I needed undeniable, theatrical proof. Something that would not only expose Karen, but also force the HOA's hand. It was time to stop playing defense and go on the offensive. It was time for Operation Shocking Surprise. The plan was multi-pronged, a blend of technology and good old-fashioned psychological warfare. First, the technical aspect. I disconnected my outdoor outlet from the main power supply. No more free electricity for Karen. Instead, I connected it to a high-capacity portable battery, one that had just enough juice to make the charging indicator on her Tesla light up, but not enough to actually charge the car. She'd think she was getting away with it, but she'd be draining a dead battery. Next, the theatrical element. I installed a small, discreet, weatherproof speaker near the outlet, hidden amongst the shrubbery. This speaker was connected to a remote trigger, which I would control from inside my house. The pièce de résistance was the audio recording I'd prepared. A deep, booming voice, mimicking the authoritative tone of a Tesla security system, announcing, "Warning, unauthorized energy transfer detected. This incident has been recorded and reported to the authorities." I even added a few extra touches just for Karen. A slight delay between the plug-in and the warning, to give her that moment of false security. And, for a bit of added flair, a follow-up sound effect. A short, sharp burst of comical, cartoonish laughter, just to drive home the point that she'd been utterly and completely fooled. I tested the system multiple times, adjusting the volume and timing until it was perfect. The anticipation was exhilarating. I imagined Karen's face, her smug expression crumbling into panic, her carefully constructed facade shattering into a million pieces. It was almost beautiful. The waiting game began. I knew Karen's routine. She usually showed up sometime after midnight when she thought everyone was asleep. I kept a close watch on the security monitor, my finger hovering over the remote trigger. Finally, around 12:45 a.m., her Tesla glided into view, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was showtime. The huntress was now the hunted. The adrenaline surged as I watched Karen, on my monitor, saunter up to the outlet, charger in hand, completely oblivious to the trap I'd laid. She plugged it in, the familiar click echoing in the silent night. She leaned against her Tesla, pulled out her phone, and that smug, self-satisfied smirk returned to her face. Not for long, I thought, my finger tightening on the remote. I waited a beat, letting her savor her victory for a few precious seconds. Then I pressed the button. The night exploded with sound. The booming voice, amplified by the hidden speaker, ripped through the stillness. "Warning. Unauthorized energy transfer detected. This incident has been recorded and reported to the authorities." Karen's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. She jumped back, her phone flying from her hand, her eyes wide with terror. Her head snapped around, searching for the source of the voice. For a split second she was completely paralyzed, a deer caught in headlights. Then, the panic truly set in. She yanked the charger out with such force that she nearly tripped over herself. She fumbled with the cord, her hands shaking, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. Without even bothering to unplug the other end from her car, she bolted. She sprinted down my driveway, a blur of floral cardigan and flailing limbs disappearing into the night. The half-dragged charger, still connected to her fleeing Tesla, bounced pathetically behind her. I watched the entire scene unfold, tears of laughter streaming down my face. It was pure, unadulterated comedic gold. But the laughter quickly subsided, replaced by a steely determination. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I began my campaign. I sent a detailed email to the HOA board, including the video footage, the electricity usage logs, and the testimonies from Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Davis. I expected a swift response, a condemnation of Karen's actions. Instead, I received a vague, non-committal reply, stating that they would look into the matter. It was clear that Karen's influence, her network of cronies, was still holding strong. Fine. If the HOA wouldn't act, I would. I printed out copies of the email and the video stills. I went door to door, sharing my story with my neighbors, showing them the undeniable proof. The response was overwhelming. Anger, disbelief, and a shared sense of violation. We were a community scorned, and we were finally ready to fight back. We scheduled an emergency HOA meeting. The reckoning was coming. Karen was about to learn that actions do, indeed, have very real consequences. The HOA meeting fallout was swift and brutal, but the story didn't end there. Somehow, a snippet of the shocking surprise video, Karen's panicked flight, made its way onto social media. It went viral. Within days, it was everywhere. And then, the unbelievable happened. A tweet appeared from none other than Elon Musk himself. It was a simple retweet of the video with the caption, "Don't mess with Tesla owners or their electricity." My phone exploded with notifications. News outlets were calling. The story had reached a whole new level of crazy, and I was suddenly in the middle of it. Karen, unsurprisingly, sold her house and moved away, the neighborhood collectively exhaling a sigh of relief. The HOA underwent a significant overhaul, its more ludicrous rules repealed, its power structure dismantled. We'd learned a valuable lesson about community, about standing up for what's right, and about the surprising power of a well-placed hidden speaker. And, perhaps most importantly, we all invested in lockable outdoor outlets. The era of Karen was over, and a new era of genuine neighborly peace and honestly metered electricity had begun. The memory would serve well to ensure it never happened again.